Welcome to the fourth in our series of 20 Things I Want My Healthcare Provider to Know. This episode is on life expectancy and two syndromes. First, I want to introduce you to my great uncle Leo. This is Leo Foley, who was born in 1907 and died in 1947. Leo's in front of the old family farmhouse in central Illinois that I was in as a child. But unfortunately, both Leo and the house are now gone. Leo lived an interesting life. He lived to be 40, which was unusual at that time. He lived at home until he was about 10, which was also unusual for the time. And then he lived in a residential facility in Michigan until he was about 18. And then at that time, he moved into state facilities in central Illinois. I'll tell you a little story about state facilities back in those days. My mother tells the story that when they would go visit him, when she was a child, they didn't have a phone, so they would show up unannounced to the state facility. And she said that you weren't allowed to go see where he actually lived, and it would typically take them about an hour to bring him up to where you visited. And even as a child, she wondered if perhaps they either couldn't find him or they were cleaning him up or a combination thereof. It's good to see that we've come a long way, a very significant way since then, although obviously we still have ways to go. When Leo was born, the life expectancy of a person with Down syndrome was about 9, and now it's about 60. We actually had the privilege of seeing one of the oldest well-documented people with Down syndrome who died at age 83. She died actually from the complications of a hip fracture, which had a lot to do with her being 83 and a woman, although osteoporosis is more common in people with Down syndrome. There are some premature aging issues in people with Down syndrome, and we will talk about that in future presentations. One of the things I like to talk about when we talk about life expectancy is what I call two syndromes. Now, you won't find this in the literature except in our two books because basically we made it up. But it's an interesting concept. It's interesting that Leo presumably had trisomy 21. He certainly seemed to have had Down syndrome, although that's not what they called it at the time. But presumably he did have an extra 21st chromosome, although no one knew for sure because it was not that the extra 21st chromosome caused Down syndrome was not known until 11 years after Leo had died. But despite the same genetics, presumably, that people have today with Down syndrome, as Leo had 100 years ago, Down syndrome looks very different, and that's why I call it the two syndromes. Let's start with expectations. So when Leo was born, it's very likely that my great-grandparents were told that Leo won't walk, he won't talk, he won't do this, he won't do that. And that, unfortunately, isn't even that ancient of history. Families have been told that for years. But now, fortunately, we are seeing that this is changing dramatically. And families are so much more interested and eager to encourage their children to participate in a wide variety of things, and we see people with Down syndrome participating in many things. And so the expectations, even at birth, are significantly different than they would have been in the early 1900s. And the life expectancy is so different. Again, when Leo was born, in the early 1900s, life expectancy was only 9. When I graduated from medical school in 1984, the life expectancy was still less than 30. And now, as I noted, it's now about 60. So it's very likely when Leo was born that my great-grandparents were not concerned about Leo's adulthood. They really were not anticipating that he would have had one, although interestingly enough, he did in fact live to be about 40. But again, so the life expectancy significantly impacted what they would think about with regards to Leo's future. Certainly today, it's much more common that our patients outlive their parents, and we see that to a great degree. So certainly the life expectancy issue has changed things dramatically. The other thing that's so different is opportunities. When we started the clinic in 1992, was very interesting that some of our families with older sons and daughters or brothers and sisters with Down syndrome at that time, if the person with Down syndrome in their family had attended a school, it's because they had started a school. If they attended a work program, it's because they had started a work program. A rec program, they had started the rec program. Certainly now with federal law being what it is, people with Down syndrome have opportunity to participate in school right from a very early age. Now certainly we can continue to work on doing a better job, but certainly the expectations and the opportunities for school were so different back even 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but certainly 100 years ago when Leo was born. So the goals are very different. The goals of my great-grandparents for Leo were probably very limited. And certainly the goals of our families, of our patients today, are much more broad and much more expecting that their sons or daughters will be able to participate in a wide variety of activities, school, learn things, jobs, and certainly housing, their homes as they go forward and as they, particularly as they outlive their parents. So the goals and the plans for people with Down syndrome are very different than they were in the past. So again, same genetics, Leo and somebody born today, but very different lives, and thus the concept of two syndromes. Now, one of the issues that helps people participate and do as well as they're doing is improved health care. And that's something we're going to focus quite a bit on as we go forward here in the next several presentations. In Leo's time, there was very little opportunity for that and very little expectation that he would get good health care. So we will look at this more as we go forward, and I look forward to the next video that we will be bringing to you soon.